Many people, I've been puzzling over paranoid reading and reparative reading, or you're so paranoid you probably think this essay is about you, for years, ever since my friend James first told me about it on a scorching day in the West Village. A piece doing some of that puzzling appears later in this collection. Though it's written predominantly for an academic audience, paranoid reading is about something that affects us all, which is how we make sense of the world, how we approach knowledge and uncertainty, as we are constantly doing in the course of our daily lives, and particularly at times of rapid political or cultural change. Sedgwick begins by describing the paranoid approach, so common and widely practiced that we sometimes forget there are alternatives to it. A paranoid reader is concerned with gathering information, tracing links, and making the hidden visible. They anticipate and are perennially defended against disaster, catastrophe, disappointment. They are always on the lookout for danger, about which they can never, ever know enough. Anyone who's spent time on the internet in the past few years will recognise how it feels to be caught up in paranoid reading. During my years on Twitter, I became addicted to the ongoing certainty that the next click, the next link would bring clarity. I believed that if I read every last conspiracy theory and threaded tweet, the reward would be illumination. I would finally be able to understand not only what was happening, but what it meant and what consequences it would have. But a definitive conclusion never came. I'd taken up residence in a hothouse for paranoia, a factory manufacturing speculation and mistrust. This, Sedgwick explains, is the problem with paranoia as an approach. Though paranoid readings can be enlightening and grimly revelatory, they also have a tendency to loop towards dead ends, tautology, recursion, to provide comprehensive evidence for hopelessness and dread, to prove what we already feared we knew. While helpful at explaining the state we're in, they're not so useful at envisaging ways out, and the end result of indulging them is often a fatal numbness. At the very end of the essay, she briefly, tantalizingly floats the possibility of an altogether different kind of approach that isn't so much concerned with avoiding danger as with creativity and survival. A useful analogy for what she calls reparative reading is to be fundamentally more invested in finding nourishment than identifying poison. This doesn't mean being naive or undeceived, unaware of crisis or undamaged by oppression. What it does mean is being driven to find or invent something new and sustaining out of inimical environments. She suggests several artists whose work she considers reparative, among them Joseph Cornell, John Waters, and Jack Smith. To this list, I would add nearly all of the artists dealt with in these pages, many of whom came from emotionally or literally impoverished backgrounds, who lived in societies that starved them of sustenance and that frequently legislated against or otherwise attempted to curtail and punish their erotic and intellectual lives. All these artists, nevertheless, made work that bubbles with generosity, amusement, innovation, and creative rage. It is not only important but possible to find ways of attending to such motives and positionalities, Sedgwick concludes, in a sort of rallying cry for reparative criticism. Hope, often a fracturing, even a traumatic thing to experience, is among the energies by which the reparatively positioned reader tries to organise the fragments and part objects she encounters or creates. Because the reader has room to realise that the future may be different from the present, it is also possible for her to entertain such profoundly painful, profoundly relieving, ethically crucial possibilities as that the past, in turn, could have happened differently from the way it actually did. Hope doesn't mean being blind to the state things are in, or uninterested in how they got that way. Sedgwick was writing at the epicentre of the AIDS crisis, at a time when many of her closest friends and colleagues were dying difficult and painful.